Now, I do not want to discuss all the presentations with a critical eye. However, I have had certain moments of enlightenment as I was listening to those presentations. Of course, I'd like to emphasize what has been said, but as the US Americans say, I want to talk about the white elephant right there in the middle of the room that no one wishes to see. So I will start with the final session and go to the beginning. 1915-1. We learned a lot about this period. But something was missing. And what was missing has repercussions in my life. Years ago, I was doing work about the population exchange between Turkey and Greece, and I had to look at the parliament minutes, written records of the parliament. And I've seen that when people were giving out the land to people from Greece, some MPs from southeast were objected to it. Şefik Bey said on March 13th, as they were discussing how the population exchange was taking place, he holds a speech, and here's what he says. After this was given to the migrants, they were to be given to the eastern provinces. First, you look into the masjid. This is what they say he means. You have the real natives of this land, the real people of this land. These ones, he means the Greeks from Greece. So they will receive the houses. No, first of all, our own people should receive houses, and then they should receive things. I believe that in the East, everyone needs such a property. So all of a sudden, a group was established. I realized that there was such a group in the parliament established. Then a book was published. A conservative writer wrote this book, and when I read it, I have underlined some places. It says that in 1915, when the Russian army entered Van, and the Armenian governance in Van for 70 days caused violence and persecution, etc. So hundreds of thousands of people had to flee from the region. I learned from this book. And in order to help these people, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs always had a budget which was being increased, and the MPs kept asking why this was the case. And on March 24th, 1918, the head of the Migration Affairs, Hamdi Bey, makes a speech in the parliament and says that the number of migrants is 825,991 people. Again, İleri Journal, published on April 10th, looks at the records and gives some statistical data and says the number of migrants was more than 843,000. And 324,826 of them were from Trabzon, 287,474 were from Erzurum, more than 100 were from Van, and 130,000 were from Bitlis. These are really huge figures. Now I keep on reading, again, in terms of migration, again in that same speech, Hamdi Bey says on March 24th that the number of migrants was 825,000, but with the numbers which are not added into records, the real number of migrants or refugees is probably about 1.5 million. This is the white elephant I'm talking about. Unfortunately, we could not talk about this subject in this meeting. If only we could have done this. Thankfully, there is literature. Yaşar Kemal, as you know, comes from Van. And with French critic Alain Bosquet, he tells about his life. My father, my mom, and the whole family came from the Ernest village by the Van Lake. It's called the Günseli village right now. It is under Muradiye district. So he was born in Adana, but this is what his parents told him. That village is right next to Van Lake on the skirts of the Esrük mountain. It is close to the Süphan village, which is the second highest mountain after Mount Ararat. It must be the spring months of 1915. The Russian army has defeated the Ottoman army and drops into the village with cannonball sounds. The cannonballs fall right into the city and causes a huge hole in the middle of the city, and hot waters come out of that hole. They come to the Bendimahi bridge, and what do they see? It's doomsday. People are flocking. People are killing each other to cross the bridge, and the Russian army is right behind them. They are continuing to hit with cannonballs. There are those who go wounded, who die, who are falling under the crowd. It's all a mess. And then they come to Van. My mom used to say, we came to Van. I'm seeing a province for the first time, and that province is totally empty. I was so afraid. I haven't been so frightened in my whole life. And then she continues. My family stays by the Van castle for about a week, and then they go to Diyarbakır, or the villages of Diyarbakır. I don't know why. I don't know for what. I don't know the reason behind it. My mother did not know about this neither. They go to the desert down below Mardin. They had a lot of money with them when they left their village, but the father of my mom, Ajo, died on the desert. They are trying to get to Çukurova, Adana. On their way, they have seen many fallen soldiers or soldiers with disabilities, many people who have fallen ill, and many dead soldiers as well. The war is continuing as well. My family says that everyone robbed other people, only our family did not, and they were proud of this. That's what they used to say. Then I continue. Mesopotamia desert was it was fraught with people, Armenians, Kurds, Turkmens, Azeris, Yazidis, Nestorians, Assyrians, Syriacs, who were killed in the southeastern Anatolia and eastern Anatolia, and with their orphans. Dogs were looking for gazelles, birds, and other animals to attack. The children also were acting like schools of animals or herds. They were all naked and in destitution. They were going around as flocks or herds, and they were attacking one village after the other, just like grasshoppers. Then they stopped by a river in the forest. My father knows that they will be in Çukurova in a couple of days. Why Çukurova? Why not Gaziantep, Maraş, Urfa, Diyarbakır, or Aegean? I've asked for it, but I don't know. Many Kurdish people went all the way to İzmir, Afyon, Denizli, Konya, even to Ankara. And then finally, a reminiscent of the mother, some belt. They have a golden belt which they sell, and they get good money for this. So Hurşit Bey buys this belt and gives a recommendation letter to the father of Yaşar Kemal, the author. And they send this letter of recommendation in Kadirli to the president of the Resettlement Commission. Then when, upon reading the letter, the man is really friendly to this man. And he says, look, the son of the Kurdish person, I will give you a great mansion. You will have the nicest house. You came from the highly reverable Hurşit Bey. If I were to send such a great man to you, etc., etc., I will give you the Şemay's land, who is an Armenian. And father of Yaşar Kemal says, I don't want it. Arif Bey, gets aggressive. Then why did you come here? He says. Why did you bring me this letter? He says, just so that you settle me someplace. I'm settling you someplace, and to the best place. And he says, I don't want a house. Why not? Because my mom says, and Arif Bey is really angry. What did she say? He says, my mom said, the nest of a bird, bird that was sent out, will not be good to any other bird. They are not birds, they're Armenians. He says, they're birds, etc. So, this story, told by Yaşar Kemal, is still untold, also in this meeting. And this was the biggest thing that was lacking in this meeting, and I hope that young people will revisit this subject. Well, I will be talking about other papers. Özge Ertem and Emre Can Dağlıoğlu are the ones I'd like to congratulate, and I'd like to be proud of them because they used to be my former students. They did something interesting. They looked at archives in a language they don't speak. What do? They translated it. They had it translated. And they put it in context. Mikhail Nishanyan, I'd like to say something for him. Now in Turkey, here is the position that we are at right now. If we know that something exists, then we will have it translated, then we will have it read. So we might need a library as such. You're working in a very good institution like the Bibliothèque Nationale. So maybe you could have a look at the Armenian narratives published in literary magazines. This must be quite often the case. You know, in the 30s, 40s, 50s, if you could prepare a bibliography for this, you would really pave the way for all these young people doing research in the field. And then, again, in Emre's presentation, Hacedur's report was discussed. How did we know about Hacedur? Well, know is not a good word here, but he was an Armenian cleric in our eyes, right? But according to what Emre Can told us, it sounds like someone like Makarios, isn't it? Well, it's like someone right in the middle of politics, all the way, into the politics, bargaining with Kurds, bribery here and there, etc. Now, this sort of a narrative is something really useful for me. Human beings are like that. Human beings offer bribes. Human beings take bribes. Maybe thanks to all these, the turning people as such, the world turns and transforms itself, hopefully, to a nicer place. So Barbara Mergerian and Hayk Martrosyan made great presentations. We are thankful and grateful for their work. But again, something is lacking. Another white elephant that was lacking. In the 19th century, people talk about the nationalist and religious people, that missionaries were the biggest problems of the Ottoman Empire. Was this really the case? How about the Patriarchy? Wasn't it at all their business at all? So what do they do? They are like wolves stealing sheep from the flock, from the herd. So if we do not write the petitions, the complaint petitions written to the Patriarchy, and if we do not form pressure so that the archives of the Patriarchy are opened, then this story about the missionaries will always be repeating the discourses of the missionaries themselves, just like Barbara and Hayk had to do it. A story came to my mind 15-20 years ago. A dear friend of mine, Kristen Philo, was writing the thesis, and they were going to the Ottoman archives, working on the Greek rebellion, the Greek independence movement, and also they were going to the Patriarchy archive. And I said, the people from Imam Hatip schools, the religious schools, are they showing you archives? And she said, oh, they're really great. They help me out. They read out things for me when I cannot read it. I have a real problem with the Patriarchy, actually. She said, I'm asking for 5 documents. I asked for 3 documents. They sent me 5. And the Patriarch has approved of this. This was in 1995. So we need to do something so that the archives of the Patriarchate are opened. Maybe if a new Patriarch is chosen for the community, this might work. Hopefully it will happen. This is another outcome of this meeting. Otherwise, it won't help much. So again, 1890s. These are the preparatory phase of the 1915 genocide. The Adrian historiography puts it this way. But then, out of the 2 projects, I'm seeing that they were actually talking about a very joyful period, and as Emre Can says it, this cannot be explained by the Hamidiye regiments and the Sultan's period, the Red Sultan's period. It is a multi-dimensional collapse of the empire we're talking about. Another nice thing was told by Burçin. The Küllihan Bey and his family from Mükis were saviors and then later on turned to be plunderers. So this sort of a deceitfulness is really interesting. They were plunderers and the circumstances change, balances change, so they declare themselves as saviors. And David Gaunt said something really important. He said Assyrians attacked the troops of Halil Pasha and they were defeated. But this very act, which was this military positioning, very interestingly, also changed, or it did not improve the victimhood understanding between Assyrians. They let go of their stones only. This was something really important. Yektan, I will be talking about your presentation. And then Nicolas Algelo also told us that we need more translated material when it comes to Assyrians. It's not like the merchants in the Grand Bazaar. If the Grand Bazaar merchants could even create a fund and had their texts translated into Turkish or English, that'd be great. And I don't think it would be too costly for them.
What Suavi Aydın talked about was quite complicated. It confused us a little bit, but here's what we saw. After 1850s, Ottoman reconquered their homelands from a military perspective. This is the first point. Secondly, it takes to the tango, is what they say. So there must be an adversary, there must be a competent. They were the derebes, the local powers, local authorities. So they oppressed them, the Kurdish base, the federal powers. They crushed the federal powers. Nowadays, the Kurdish nationalists tell the story of the feudal powers. Bedirhan Bey used to collect fees, and the Entente that has been continuing for 400, 500 years, and then he objects, he rebels, and the Ottoman Empire sends armies against him, so it has nothing to do with nationalism. Anish's presentation, the Gorky Fountain presentation, it was a beautiful presentation. It reminds me, I was there for the inauguration of the Akmar Church, and one day before that we went to see the president of the Chamber of Commerce of one. He was quite glad that the church was being opened. I said that according to the Christian traditions, every church has a saint, has a name day. I told him that, do you want there to be masses every week? He said, wouldn't it be great? I said, yes, but then you need a priest. I mean, there are people who need to be there for masses. Are you going to pay their salaries? I said, and he said, yes, we will. Why not? So when Aktamar was opened, Turkey was a different place. So I reminded him of the previous Turkey. I said that a man called Vartan came to America and he wanted to open a place, but you said, I said that you turned it into hell for him. And he said, yes, those were the bad days, but now we overpassed those days. But I don't know it is really overcome those days. There was Hilmar Kaiser used a great term. He said that there was a roadmap before the CPU, and they turned to the wrong direction, and then it became a genocide, he said. It was a quite good analysis, and then Yektan underlined the issue of responsibility. And we met this new man, Abdülkadir Bey from Antep. He was quite courageous from what we heard. And Hrant Suni's narrative was quite impressive for me as well. Ronald Suni, diplomatic history is not very much used in research with regard to Armenian genocide. We talk about Berlin Agreement, but the bargains that were behind the scenes of 1915, how the two parties approached the issue is not quite elaborated on. I would like to thank Ronald Suni for talking about this. How did the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs see this? We know it from the book, but it's would be better to elaborate on this issue. And as Ronald Suni speaks Russian and he is interested in this issue, his perspective was quite useful. And just like Hilmar did, he used certain what-if questions. He asked these what-if questions. And it is when we ask these what-if questions that we understand. If Ottomans had done as the 1914 Reform Agreement predicted, there would have been no genocide. And we have to look at the genocide from a war perspective. We cannot just put the concept of war aside, because war prepared all the conditions that led to the genocide. Now, finally, I would like to talk about the paper of Yektan. I would like to thank you very much. It was wonderful, your speech. First of all, I believe that we are leaving behind the classical history writing with regard to the Armenian genocide. In terms of the nationalist history writing, the Turkish people look at Turks, Iranians look at Iranians, Russians look at Russians, but this is no longer how we have to approach this issue. We are living in an international world. The concept of objection, the concept of resistance, these are very interesting as well. The Touchid party is paralyzed during the Armenian genocide. Again, taking Van as an example, these theological approaches, so these analyses that shows us the end of the movie from the start is collapsing, because they were brothers and sisters, the Armenians and the CPU, but at CUP, but at some point this all collapses. It is not like the classical history says. they have been thinking about doing a massacre for years. So the first one was 1980s, and then in 1915 there was the second one. I think that we understand now from Yektan's paper that this analysis is no longer valid, and this opens up new windows of research for us. So if I were to do another PhD, I would look at resistance areas. So in 1915, which areas resisted to deportation? I would look at the villages, I would look at the towns, I would try to analyze the way of organization in such regions. I would like to reveal the reasoning behind it. Yektan said something very important. He said that Armenians were not docile victims. They were active people. This is quite important. So years ago, I think it was in 2009, I met Hrant Suni at a meeting at Clark University. I delivered a presentation there as well. Ron was doing what I'm doing now at that moment. He was summarizing the whole conference, and he said something. I would like to remind him what he said. He turned to the young Armenian researchers and he said, "Look at me," to the Armenian genocide rostrum. Taner Akçam and Ayhan Aktar delivered one of the papers. So from now on, Istanbul, Turkey might be the center of Armenian genocide research. If you are not lazy, it will become the center. Istanbul will become the center, he said. I believe it is now the center. So I would like to thank the Hrant Dink Foundation. They made this possible. Thank you. Now we are in the free hit part of our meeting. Now you are going to take the floor. I spoke for 20 minutes. Now it's the jam session. If you have anything to say about this meeting, about the topic of discussions, topics of research.
Persons
Mixed.
up.
I'm talking about the family. That's true. That's true. Yes, yes.
Hığutyun was a personage that played a now unclear role in 1895. And there is this Mutula Bey who played an unclear role in 1915.
But same family, isn't it?
Same family with different persons.
Okay.
Second thing, Nicholas probably will rise up some minutes after now, but you mentioned Suryani, but definitely Nicholas spoke about Assyrians.
Okay.
But he is not in this hall, I suppose, behind me.
Okay.
Or it was not translated, I don't know.
Okay. Evet. Yeni araştırma konu. Buyurun, yalnız herkes mikrofona konuşsun.
Ben şeyi sormak istiyorum. Bu Müslüman Ermeniler üzerine herhangi bir çalışma var mı?
Efendim, kitap çıktı, aşağıda satılıyor. Müslümanlaştırmış. 2 sene evvel böyle bir konferans oldu. Müslümanlaşmış Ermeni. Evet, aşağıda satılıyor. Alırsanız memnun oluruz.
That were converted to Islam.
Lütfen.
Yani ilk başta çok teşekkür.
Can I share a few comments? I realized that I have learned a lot. I didn't write a PhD thesis on one, but I'm kind of stuck on one because it deserves being focused on. It shows you how what kind of different approaches you can take to think about this story. So when you dig the issue, for example, people are looking for treasure, and I think the academicians can find treasure there in one as well. They will find gold if they focus on one. So we have to go back. I worked on 1915. I looked at 1913, 1914, and 1915. But every single day, I realized my shortcomings. So today I learned a lot from the panels that focused on 1890s, and it was quite striking and exciting for me. So I attach great importance of the work of Armenians. So the fact that we have many actors, many narratives, and such kind of this kind of narratives are what we need. As I said in my own presentation, I would like to remind it again, Armenian genocide was not only the genocide of Armenians. There were other victims. There were Kurds as well. But there were other victims that we cannot name. For example, the work of David Ground shows us this as well. The story of Assyrians and Chaldeans, we consider that as a different story. We don't combine these stories together. And apart from that, Yazidis, we don't know anything about it. We saw in one that Yazidis also are victims of the genocide. But I have to say something. There was a question regarding that as well. For example, when I think about one, many groups in one were not mentioned, by the way. There is also a Jewish study. This is a different story. I'm just drawing a map, trying to see where everybody stood in 1915. Here is the odd thing. Yes, we have expectations. Christians stood with the Christians. Yes, true, it happened. But let me say the following. When you take a look at August 1914, you don't know who will stand with who. We cannot say at all. But you get out of this uncertainty a pattern. And here is the pattern. Yes, while fighting against Muslims, there are Assyrians, Armenians, and Yazidis, but Jews are automatically put on the same side with Muslims, but they have a different story. They suffer a different victimhood in one. But there was a question, and then there was an answer to that question, but I would like to correct something. During this 70 days in one, after the Tashnak government was founded, because it was not Armenians who came to the power, it was Tashnaks. And the first Tashnak state was not established in Yerevan. It was established in Van. So it is quite important. Van is quite important from that perspective as well. But I would like to add one more thing. There's a letter written by a bishop to a governor of Van, to an administrator of Van. He used a very diplomatic language, and he wrote this letter in French because the official language was Armenian. It was written in French, and used a very diplomatic language. He reminded us of a Christian brethren, a Christian brotherhood. He's asking for help. And on the other hand, you can see the following, this Christian brotherhood. Yes, it works when you make war together, but when you look at Yazidis, they're complaining about the fact that they're not getting enough support from Assyrians. But on the other hand, Yazidis can be represented. They built a government for the first time. But here's what I'm trying to say. You can think of them as a Christian group. You can put them into the map as a Christian group. But the Armenian government sees their alliance with Yazidis as a more solid and a long-term one. I will stop here, but this was quite useful for me. This was quite beneficial for me. This region excites me a lot. But I have never been there, by the way. Let's continue.
First of all, thank you everybody for an incredible 2 days So much learning went on, so much wonderful research, and everybody has to be very hopeful because the new generation that we saw here, the younger folks, are moving in all kinds of different directions. And I think one thing I learned here is that we might want to look at the history, prehistory of the genocide, von before 1890s, before 1915, in the way that many people have done, as a kind of social ecology. That is a way in which, for many, many decades, even centuries, people managed to live together. And eventually, at certain moments of crisis, it failed. This ecology failed. The empire itself didn't know it was destined to fail. It attempted in a variety of ways, Tanzimat, allying with the Muslims in Hamidiyya, 1908, a new surge of Ottomanism, the failure of Ottomanism, the genocide. The leaders of that empire tried in a variety of ways, ultimately disastrously by mass murder and deportation, to reform and preserve their empire. They failed. But somehow these people managed to live together, and Armenians, Assyrians, and others thought they could actually live together all the way up to 1914. It's one of the things I learned. And what I was impressed by was the research that went outside of history that began to talk about what I'm calling this social ecology, right? I'm thinking of the papers by David Leupold, by this very young and wonderful scholar, Anush Suni. I think she will go far. By Marlene, by, I can't even remember all the names, Suavi, Seymush, Mehmet, Jelly, all of these folks, Burjin, who told us stories, who gave us anthropology, ethnographies. In other words, we start to go down. Ayhan mentioned diplomatic history. We used to do history as politics, great men, governments, and, you know, the Quai d'Orsay spoke to the Wilhelmstrasse, you know, and so forth. And now we keep going down. Anthropology, ethnography, these kinds of studies, political economy are the saving place, which will illuminate how people can live together, could live together. In America and in Turkey today, we seem to be moving in the wrong direction. But maybe this is one way we can recover some of those paths of imperial coexistence. That's important. And I want to mention, I was very impressed by Marlene's paper and so forth. I was hoping that we'd hear Ghazi Nabla sing, but that didn't happen. Maybe Marlene will give us a number later. But she talked about what she called a fantasy. I've talked to her about this, right? What she called a fantasy of people living together and sharing suffering. And Armenians have a saying, which apparently you also have in Turkish, that where the fire hits, it hurts, right? Ateş. Yeah, you all know it, right? Ateş düştü. So, of course, your own pain, my grandfather used to say, is your own. It's hard to share. But there is a fantasy, or maybe I would call it a utopia, a place that you think you can reach, a place toward which you wish your politics and your ethics would move, that we might imagine that we can live together. Without that imaginary of living together, you can't even get there, right?
You cannot survive, probably.
You cannot survive. And we all live in multinational states. And that's what this conference has been about. And music, of course, is also that utopia. That is, somehow, magically, we will be able to live together. So it seems to me that this particular conference, in a way, had its own utopia. What was the sense of it? And what is the sense of the whole Hrant Dink Foundation project? It's to recover a past, to understand how we destroyed each other, how we also live together, in order, in the present and future, that we might recover, we might be able to do that again. So I'm going to thank you all for that wonderful experience of these last 2 days.
Thank you.
Maybe I would like to actually follow up on that and think about all of these things that we were so inspired by as we were listening to the presentations that focus precisely on the sites of creativity and co-creation, co-witnessing of different kinds of sufferings and so on. And certainly as we look into the future, I think we need more such research, looking at the challenges of such acts, but also the promises. And for instance, I mean, arts really, Vasken's presentation, I think, opened a whole new window. And Yektan mentioned, you know, the long history of Van as a site of creativity, incredible productivity and creativity. And I feel as if we have not paid enough homage to that history of creativity, and we certainly have a lot to learn from it, for sure, as we look into the future. And we, I think, have a lot to learn from the different actors who have created in different ways, whether they are the Dengbeş singers who create or recreate stories and histories through singing, or art. And of course, I think the question of gender has been another elephant in this room, in a certain sense. We haven't really talked at all about the gendered aspect of any of these histories, any of these processes that we have discussed in the conference. And Marlene reminded us of women who have been, through their singing, rewriting this history, both in Yerevan and in Van, and now coming together to write a history for the future, to try to write a history for the future. And after this panel, I turned on the social media and learned that one of the oldest women's organizations in Van, Vakat, has been closed down, along with other women's organizations in other cities, from Selis to others. Since yesterday, several hundred organizations working, some of them children's organizations, children's NGOs and women's NGOs, have been closed down. So it was especially painful to learn about the closing down of Vakat. Van, of course, today is a major site of feminist activism. There are numerous women's organizations, the whole Van area, and now they're being closed down as we speak about the history of these actors having been silenced. And I think in the future it will be very important to make these linkages, as the last couple of panels have been doing. What's happening today and how it's related in terms of the actors themselves and in terms of historical processes to what happened 100 years or more ago. But I have really been inspired tremendously by the research, the diversity of the research that's coming out precisely along these lines. The young researchers are really creating a new future for all of us, I think. So thank you, everyone who contributed to the making of this amazing event. Whenever I come here, I feel like I'm able to breathe. It was amazing to be able to breathe together in these very dark times. Thank you.
Yeah, first of all, of course, it was a very precious opportunity to be here for the first time at the Hrant Dink Foundation for conference. What I would like to add or kind of introduce another perspective was, as you might know, like also some of the young researchers, we did not come actually from the background of history. I mean, I do respect history as the kind of basic foundation for doing any serious research on that work. But I think when we approach the notion of memory and the notion of history from a more sociological perspective, we see that it actually is the present, is the place where history is actually made, or perception of history, to be more precise. And that's in this kind of field of tension between how we actually experience the past, but mostly we speak about memory which we have not experienced, which actually evade our opportunity to experience. So it's passed on memory, which is open to interpretation, and it's the tension field between this past, this experience, and a kind of imagination of the future. And I think, for example, when we talk again, with regard to in how far actually these kind of created, imaginations of the past do reflect the past, one might also ask in a very provocative way, how important is it actually that it reflects the past? That would be the provocative argument. And the second thing is, even particularly if we assume, for example, that there are tendencies to reimagine, particularly among progressive people in Turkey, Kurdish, Turkish people, to imagine the past more harmonious than it actually had been. This is also reflecting, I think, a really deep willingness also to move beyond this past which you cannot move beyond while actually iterating and repeating it. So I think without creating this amnesia that would allow everything just to happen again, I think it is also important because it actually also diverts our attention towards the future, the imagined future, rather than the past that changes us. Thank you.
I guess this will be the final remark. So let me have the final word on this. Okay, here's how I'd like to start. In my presentation, I focused on one thing. It was an area that was not at all studied. One research always focuses or tends to focus on the eastern part of the lake. But there was the western part, Erciş, Adilcevaz, etc. So right after my presentation, my friend said, yes, everyone spoke of their hometowns. Yes, because this is where we were children. Our villages were home to our childhood. And we really grew up amidst the ruins of monasteries, churches, and cemeteries. We knew that other people lived there before us, and the elderly talked about those people. When we were children, there was a huge collective memory about Armenians. Unfortunately, all of them have passed away today. And one by one, they knew them, their names. But the one work focuses never on that region in Erciş, in Adilcevaz. It was completely made up of Armenians before 1915, the western part, that is. Erciş and Muradiye and other districts have their independence days. And in these independence days, there is a Turkish soldier, and then there are the Armenians. So this is being represented every single year. So based on that, a huge Armenian animosity is being provoked in Van. And particularly to the high school students, they had this done. You should look clean and neat and tidy. And people who looked neat and tidy role-played the Turkish side, and darker complexion people played Armenians. And I have seen that they were bearing goatees, they were having goatee beards. And then I saw Dashnak pictures later on, so it was probably right. This is how it was in their collective memory. I played the Armenian side because my teachers wanted me to once upon a time in high school. And the commander of the Armenian side was one really mischievous guy. He had to play Armenian side, but he didn't want it. And this is a story, a running joke in Erciş, but then someone attacked us because we played the Armenians, etc. So this is a very vivid story, animosity against Armenians, and this is a conscious thing. So maybe only on those independence days one could write a paper. You're right. This is a sort of memory as well, a reconstruction of a sort of memory, yes. Yes, he was forced to do the role play.
Başka?
Anything else?
Şurada var.
There's one over here.
Konferansa katkısı olan.
I'd like to thank everyone who contributed to this conference. This was really enlightening for all of us. But there's one thing I would like to say. All the academicians who spoke made one thing clear. Yes, as Armenians, we had difficult times, but they themselves are very lucky right now. because we are speaking about a very wrongful machine. And everyone can find a great outcome about research with some small work. Like a friend here spoke about bizarre celebrations on Independence Days. Yes, or some weird things. When we see it in the newspaper, we really feel the suffering in our bones. But they are very lucky, because every part that they hold the lens onto, the magnifying glass onto, there are things they can follow. When you look at the general scope, yes, big sufferings took place. However, looking at all the ills of the society needs this magnifying glass, these stories to be told in the proper way. So all these academics, and we all actually have a role to play to ensure that. We should have a proper look to all areas and try to be a better society in the future, and also recover from our diseases. As an economy professor, well, I spoke to you on this. When you look at economy, Armenians are very much part of this. Or when you take them out, the empire collapses. We are not yet at that level. But when we come to Van, we find very important things. Why? Because Van is just as important as Istanbul. It is one of the most important cities of the East. Today we look at Van. In the future we'll look at someplace else. And thanks to the great work of the presenters, of the researchers, we will do much better in the future. Thank you.
Doktor İlker Kayı, ben bir...
I am a medical doctor. My name is İlker Kayı. Between 2005 and 2007, I was working as a doctor in Van. And that's why I came to this conference, and because Fatih and Özge told me to, my friends. Well, what I listened to brought me back to those days when I worked as a doctor in Van. And during my village visits, I had seen these things, the rundown churches and the treasure hunt stories told, etc. I have seen them personally, all of them. And this has opened an utterly new perspective on Van. So I'd like to thank you very much for making this happen. People talk about memory. Now, when we say memory, here's what comes to my mind. Health is part of it too. So maybe the future research work could also have a look on that. This is my humble suggestion. Because when people live together, they were the health aspects as well. Health and recovery. It's like music. How did they join hands when it came to health? Who was healing them? Who were their doctors? When we were talking with Fatih, there was a pharmacist, for example. He was Armenian. What has happened to that Armenian pharmacist? Because he was a pharmacist, was he protected or not? Etc. So we had these growing questions in mind. Maybe I am passing a ball to the historians once again, but this is an area which would interest me. Thank you very much. Anush?
Thank you. I wanted to respond to your comment about what my dad said many years ago in Clark, that warning these young Armenian-American scholars and students that if they didn't get their act together, that soon scholars in Turkey would overtake the U.S. market in Armenian studies and Armenian history. And I'm so happy to say, at least from my point of view, that we've come to that point where in Turkey, and here at least in the Hrant Dink Foundation, there is an unbelievable wealth and vibrancy in terms of Armenian studies and the history of these areas, not only Armenians, obviously Assyrians, and hopefully in the future we can include Yazidis as well, because obviously they're missing in this situation. And I mean, I've participated in Armenian studies conferences in the US and Middle East studies conferences and anthropology conferences, but I must say I definitely feel very strongly what Ayşegül Altınay said, that we can breathe here together, and it's really an unbelievable camaraderie. And also what David Leopold has said, that I don't feel any kind of competition here, which is often something that is in an academic setting, but instead of that, a true camaraderie where we're building on each other's knowledge and sharing, and that's really wonderful, and something I'd like to thank the Hrant Dink Foundation for creating that space for us and giving us this gift, which is especially valuable for us young scholars who, like I was speaking with Marlene, we both have been doing our research in Bonn, but the historical research and foundation is limited in many ways, and so for us who are doing anthropological research and not necessarily archival research, where can we turn for that? And here we all are in the same room, and it's just an unbelievable gift to us. So thank you to all the organizers and to the foundation.
Probably we need to have a final thank to our translators. For 2 days they did their best. Evet. Peki o zaman kapatıyoruz.
Okay then, we're going to close this up. See you next year.